up, guys? As promised, we are here. We are recording a podcast following up from our late night on singleness and dating that we did right before Thanksgiving. So, we are going to jump into some questions that you guys submitted and yeah, just follow along with us and we'll have a great time. I'm here with Catherine and Caleb, and we're pumped to be here.
It's going to be a great time.
Yep, so excited.
All right. First question we have today, guys. So, we all have these different categories in dating. There's hanging out, then there's Snapchatting, then there's talking, then there's dating, seriously dating, engaged, married. So, how do we engage in the culture of dating that we're in our society?
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit in the late night, but our current cultural reality is super new. We haven't, dating is not something that's been a thing for very long. Really, in the last 100 years, ever since really like the sexual revolution happened and people are starting to see marriage and romantic relationships as not primarily like a survival tool, but primarily as a romantic relationship. People historically haven't gotten together or gotten married for romance, but for necessity. So historically, women needed to get married to have security and status and the ability to be cared for and provided for. And then men needed to get married in order to preserve their family line. And we're moving away from that now in our society, and we're in the reality of people date to get married, and people marry for love and for romance, which is great. But we have to keep that in mind as we approach this reality. There's a lot of like great things about it, but I think by and large, and I'll probably say this a couple times throughout the next however long we do this podcast, but clarity is just really important because even as you talk through all those categories, some of those are just like not there's some gray area between all of them. Hopefully there's not a lot of gray area between engaged and married, probably, but especially like between the not dating to dating.
Yeah.
Like, I think more and more that area is becoming less and less clear, and it's becoming less and less clear what dating, like what the difference between singleness and dating actually is, and where does dating start and singleness end. And I think clarity, it just has to be at the forefront of our minds as we approach these conversations. That has a lot of implications, but like clarity needs to be something that we think about as we are entering into interest in dating somebody. And so Snapchatting someone for months on end is not dating.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to somebody nonstop, or even acting like you're dating without the mutual understanding that you are dating, is not dating. There needs to be a lot of clarity. You need to communicate these things, which is becoming less and less common, but it's something that's important as we seek to care for those people around us, whether we are dating them or not.
Yeah. I feel like you can sum all that up in clarity is kindness. And so you engage in it by being clear with whoever you're wanting to date and communicate away. Catherine, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say too, like everything we're talking about on here is under the blanket of like dating with the intention to marry.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
when doing that, you really want to be intentional in every stage, not just when you're, officially deciding to date. And so if you're, creating these arbitrary categories potentially between, talking and dating and Snapchatting, I think just really evaluating, like, am I doing this with intentionality, or am I creating these labels to, like, kind of shirk some responsibility or accountability there? Because, yeah, you want to be respectful of the person's time that you're talking to, that you're snapping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just really ask yourself, like, how am I being intentional with this person and with myself in this situation?
Yeah.
Right.
You're going to hear us a lot during this podcast. We're not going to tell you a lot of things to do or not to do. We're going to talk a lot about the heart behind a lot of these things, because if you just do what we tell you to do, nothing, like, that's not actually super helpful, because your heart's not changing. And when we get into unhealthy thoughts about relationships, about dating, about singleness, it's not a problem of what we're doing, but the heart behind it. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is the heart. So yeah, I'm glad you said that.
That's great. I think we should kick it off talking about singleness. There were a few questions in here specifically about singleness. And so, yeah, we want to spend like the first few minutes or so really diving into the question, like, can you have the desire for marriage and still be called to singleness? How do you steward your time as a single person? Kind of this whole blanket topic of singleness as a believer. So, yeah, my first question I have is, can you have the desire for marriage and still be called to singleness? Whatever being called to singleness actually means.
I would challenge what it means to actually be called to singleness, because whenever you see that, that's like a common phrase that we like to throw around in our culture now, but it really has no historical basis to be a thing whatsoever. I would say that everyone is called to singleness until you say I do, and uh, yeah, like, just because you are single doesn't mean you're called to singleness. But also, like, God's calling on your life is so much bigger than if you get married or not.
Correct.
God's calling on your life is that you become a Christian, you make disciples, and you're sanctified. Mm-hmm. And if you look at Scripture, by and large, when it talks about God's calling or the will of God for your life, it's talking primarily about issues of salvation and sanctification. So the process of us being saved is God's calling of us to Himself, and God's will for our lives is that we be sanctified, which we've talked about this a little bit on Thursday nights. But this idea of being sanctified is that we become more and more and more like Jesus in our daily walks through life. And so His will and His calling for us is that we be saved and that we be sanctified. And past that, I would say that a outflow of us loving God with all of our hearts and all of our souls and all of our minds is rightly walking with Him. And that's going to lead all of us down a really different path in life. Some of us, that's going to lead to singleness. Some of us, it's going to lead to marriage. But yeah, you can have the desire. You can want to be married and end up not married, and that be okay. And vice versa. You could have this desire to be single, and then you meet somebody, and it's clear that marriage is the next best step for you guys, and you get married, and that's okay. You're not living outside of God's will. Like that needs, this idea of like, am I called to singleness? Am I called to marriage? That shouldn't be a worry in our minds, because God's calling on our lives is to Him, not to any other person. Right. Does that make sense?
I think it's like almost unhelpful to try and like zoom out and make a grand declaration for your life when we cannot possibly have that scope over our entire lives. And so I think, just like what you're saying, Caleb, it's like a question of like, am I being obedient today? And then am I being obedient tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And like, we just simply cannot have that view over our entire lives from where we stand right now.
Right. And I think it is healthy to set aside time to be single and to really be pursuing God wholeheartedly. Because I think it can be easy to fall into the thought pattern of marriage is in the Bible, therefore I need to get married. And like, there are so many gifts of marriage that like I don't want to miss out on this, that, and the other. And so I think, if our primary calling is to be sanctified, we that is a healthy thing for us to take some time to focus on our sanctification.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think too, there it kind of is a conversation of if you're desiring marriage, you're not being content. And I'm hesitant to, I think that's just an unhelpful blanket statement of, hey, your desire for marriage is sinful.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is also
because we
just
isolate
not
that,
true.
because if you're not discontent by wanting things,
Correct.
like I don't know, I desire things to happen in my life. That doesn't mean that I'm discontent in my current life situation. But there's a great book called Just Do Something. I know a couple of our leaders have it, that really speaks to a lot of the things that we're talking about really well. And if you're looking for a book recommendation, that's a really good one. It's a short book, easy read, but it really helps to put into better words than we are saying how to rightly think about a lot of things around God's will, God's calling, but it talks extensively about marriage and relationships, pretty in depth. So if you're looking for a book recommendation, I think that's a great one.
Yeah. The next question I have within that is, how do I not let my own singleness cause me to be bitter about other friends' relationships? And to that, I would say, hey, I'm the single person on this podcast. I think we need to recognize that. But, I just think of some of my really dear friends, and a lot of them are married. And man, I would really be missing out on some really great friends if I set a hard and fast rule of oh, I'm bitter that they're married and I'm not. I would really be missing out on just the gifts of friendship that they offer me. And I think it's easy to, I still very much am oh yeah, I'd love to be married, and I can look at their marriages and be like, that would be great, that would be nice. But I mean, they are really, really dear friends, and so if I didn't pray for their marriages, or if I just said, hey, I don't want to be friends with you just because you're married and I need more single friends because that's the season that I'm in, then I'd be missing out on some really great friends. But I think there is also wisdom in, if I know that this is something that I'm struggling with, oh my gosh, all my friends are married, and I'm starting to be bitter about it. I think there is some wisdom in cultivating friendships that are in the same life stage as you. And so, I have really great single friends too. And so, I think not categorizing my friends as my married friends versus my single friends has been really helpful in that. And if I let my bitterness take control, I would be missing out on some really great friendships.
Yeah.
I also historically have been horrible at this. I think honestly, I didn't master it ever. I just got in a relationship. And I think looking back now, I just could just be nasty about my friends that were in relationships. And so I think some practical steps was tame your tongue about how you talk about them when they're not around. Is your bitterness coming out in how you talk about them, and how you treat them? And be really honest with your community if that's something that you're struggling with, and consider it prayerfully. But really think about how am I letting this bitterness into my life, because that is not going to help it go away whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's also just the truth that marriage is supposed to be a picture of the relationship we have with Christ. And if you're bitter at your friends who are married, what that means is that you're not tasting the intimacy and the companionship and the love that Christ has for you the way that you need to. Because if you are tasting the fullness of what marriage is just a picture of, then you can never be bitter. It doesn't mean that you don't want marriage, but bitterness should never be something that flows out of a place of a healthy, vibrant relationship with Jesus. Because it's like if uh, I'm eating, or if I'm sitting down for dinner and I have uh, and I look over at the person next to me and they just have this amazing steak dinner, and I'm bitter that they have that. But then I look at my plate and it's like a 5 course uh, Michelin chef made meal, and theirs is just like a steak that I made on the grill and probably burned. Like there's no reason that I should ever be bitter towards that person or for what they have, because I have something so much better that should be fully sustaining me. And does that mean that we can't want marriage? No, but it means that we should never be in a place of bitterness, because we should be so secure in our relationship with Jesus first.
Yeah, I think we should let that be something that excites us too, rather than like bog us down because we haven't already been doing that.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
what an opportunity we have to like get to like learn the love of Christ
Yeah.
better and deeper too.
That's good. What are some practical ways that single people can steward their time as single people well? Maybe like what are ways that they can grow to prepare themselves for a dating relationship? That was a question we got up in there.
Mhm.
Yeah. What does stewarding singleness faithfully look like practically? That was a lot of adjectives.
Yeah. So the way that singleness is talked about in scripture is pretty radical. It's talked about really, really positively, almost arguably more positively than marriage is in scripture. And that's not to say that like there's something holier about singleness than marriage. That's not what is being said. But the reality is, if you're single, you're able to engage in the mission of God in a way that you can't when you're married. It just changes. Um, I, I'll talk about a couple things that I talked about in our late night. But if you're single, you're not tied down. Um, Marriage by design is a place for you to settle down with another person and create a home, and it's great. I love the home that we have with my family, with our kids, with my wife, and it's great. There's so much positive that comes from that, but just a consequence, a side effect of that is I can't go and be a missionary for 2 years and take 2 years off of my marriage relationship. Like that's not an option for me, and that's not a bad thing. It's a great thing that it is not an option for me to take 2 years off of spending time with my wife and my kids. Like it's a amazing role that I get to play as a dad and a husband, but it takes me away from the mission field in some really specific ways that if you're single, you are not being taken away from. So if you're single, especially if you're about to graduate college, you should be looking at your next 2 years after college in some really, I don't want to say radical because it's not that radical. We think it is because it's not how the culture lives. You should be really flipping the way that you think about your post grad life away from, okay, where am I going to get a job? Okay, I got a job in this place. I'll find a good church and find a good community and figure out how to live on mission there. It should be the other. It should be the other way around, where we are seeking out our destination, what we're doing after college, with God's will and His mission in mind first, and then how our lives and the things that we want to do fit into that secondarily. And I've seen so many people model this really, really well. I knew a guy that I went to college with that he had all the internships, was a business major, could have gotten a really, really good job right after college. And he didn't just like walk away from that with his life, but instead he took his 2 years. He was single when he graduated, and he moved and went and did a 2 year missions program where he spent 2 years in South Asia, and he spent 2 years there, and now he's back in the United States, doing the business thing that he could have gone and done right after college, but because of his life stage, and he chose to leverage his life after college to go and do something really impactful for the gospel that me, somebody that got married right after I graduated college, I couldn't do just because of my life stage. So I think that's an example, but living with that mindset is something that I would really, really challenge you to do.
That's super high view, which it's really good. I would definitely agree. But I think as we're thinking through that, what are things that we can do in the here and now, that we can really enjoy and savor the gift that is singleness.
Yeah. If you are, leverage your life for the gospel in a big picture way, but don't spend your singleness trying to not be single. That would be the biggest advice that I have.
That's right.
Like that the best possible thing that can come from that is you're not single anymore. And that's a pretty lousy way to live. So don't live like that. Live like, hang out with your friends, like engage in the mission of God just through making friends with people in your classes, and go do, like, fill up your schedule. And like, you don't have a relationship with somebody that you have to like commit a lot of time towards. And again, not to say that it's a bad thing to spend time with your significant other. It's a great thing to spend time with your significant other. You should be willing to sacrifice those things, but when you're single, you're in a place where you don't need to be sacrificing those things. So leverage that time doing really fun things, make memories with people, because those memories are the basis on which trust is built. And when you build trust with people is when you can really have an impact on people's lives. So I would say, use your time when you're single to in the same way that you would post grad, like leverage your life for the gospel, and I don't know, play all the intramurals, go to the sporting events. I don't know what people who don't like sports do.
I was going to say, like, just for the average K student or SALT student listening to this, like, you were probably invited into church community by somebody who loved you really intentionally and loved you really well. Like, be that for the people in your class. Totally. Be that for the people in the underground. Like, go sit next to somebody you like and talk to them. Like, you can be radically invitational into your life when you don't have, just those commitments to another person. That was something I really enjoyed. My freshman year was just like, okay, here we go. Who am I going to talk to today? And just saw just so much fruit from that. And it was fun too. It's like, how can I be on mission today going to my class?
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to do things alone.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of that because I haven't always thought that way. But, obviously invite people into the things that you're doing. But if you want to take a random trip to go camping, do it safely, but do it.
Maybe don't go camp by yourself.
I did, and I'm still here to tell the story. So, and then, I mean, ultimately, like, you just get to spend time with God alone more frequently. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but
that's definitely true.
Okay, cool.
Especially, I can't remember the last time I was alone with a 1-month-old and a 2-year-old and a wife.
Yep.
So it doesn't alone kind of goes out the window.
With the married person.
Spend time with God and like really, really savor that time, because if singleness is like you get to be fully devoted to God, I think Paul says that somewhere, then like be fully devoted to God and enjoy it, because ultimately, like, Jesus is the one that satisfies our every need and desire and all that. So
I'll say one more thing. You should also, while you're single, spend time, like, find married people that you really, really respect and spend time with them.
Correct.
Because odds are, for most of you guys listening to this, for most people in the world, you are going to get married. And like to pretend like that's not the case is foolish. And so, with that in mind, you should be watching, like, you should find people who you really feel like do marriage well, and you should just like spend a ton of time with them while you're single and still can. Because again, with time is one of the first things that gets taken up by marriage and relationships and all those things, which is great. But while you're single, you should invest that time into your future by spending time with people who are married. Don't wait until you start dating to uh, spend time with people who do marriage and relationships really, really well.
Last thing. Something my college pastor used to say in the realm of like, how do I prepare myself for a relationship? Be the person you want. Be the person you want to date wants to date.
There you go.
Be the person. I'm gonna say it again.
Yes,
Be the person you want to date wants to date. I don't want to date a super selfish and prideful person, so I need to work on that. But yeah, like, hey, if I want to date somebody that's super spontaneous and fun, then I should be spontaneous and fun. If I want to date a person that really like cares about discipling others and really loves to be hospitable, then man, I should really care about discipling others and being hospitable. So I think that was just a good little tidbit. Shout out Connor Osipchuk.
Shout out Connor. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day who was like, "Man, my friend is just like really going through a hard time, and I just like don't feel like I have the tools. Like, how do I help her?" And we just kind of were talking in circles a little bit and just came to the conclusion like the best way you can love that person is to love Jesus more and to know him better so that then you can show that to the person that you are like trying to show love to. And I feel like that really applies to a dating relationship too. Like, how can I, like what you're saying, Camille, like, how can I prepare? Like, be the person, like, the person that you want to date would want to date kind of thing. Like, love Jesus more so that then if that's what the Lord has for you, like, you can love them well.
Yeah. All right, we're 30 minutes into this thing. I say thank you to all the people that clicked on this because they're dating somebody and wanted to hear us talk about dating. I say we get to it. Yeah, and like I think it was Catherine said earlier, man, if you didn't have this mindset as a single person, or you like haven't in the past tense been thinking about singleness in this way, like this, none of this of what we're saying is filled with shame, but this is just what we think. So dating. All right, what can we look for in our boyfriend or girlfriend to know that they are following Jesus? If, as believers, we think that we should be dating people that are also believers, which we think we should.
Yeah.
What can we look for?
First and foremost, like, the gospel should flow out of their lives. Like, it should be a part of consistent conversation. Like, there should be fruit from that. Uh, if somebody says they care about something but doesn't ever talk about it or like do anything with it, then they don't care about it. And so, if you are dating somebody that says they're a Christian but doesn't live the way their Christian lives, or talk about their relationship with God or things that they're learning or conversations that they're having, then I would just have questions. That's not to say that, like, just because somebody is for sure, like, somebody is sinful or is going through a hard time, that doesn't mean they're not a Christian. But I would say, like, look for marks of being a Christian.
Yeah. It's like Luke 6:45. just looked it up. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. And so, like, is he living out his faith? Is he calling himself a Christian and living a completely different way? I think that's important. But
I'd also say that like health is important. You don't want to like uh it's probably not the wisest thing. Somebody might be a Christian and say they're a Christian, but be really like really limping and
yeah,
not healthy in their walk with Christ. And there's like, it's not necessarily means that they're a bad person, or it's not like a personal, it doesn't have to be a personal thing with them, but dating is a really important thing for your walk with Christ and will affect you emotionally, spiritually, personally in a lot of ways. And you don't want to um, connect yourself with somebody who is going to have a negative effect on that. And so like you need to ask questions like, are they in community? What does their community look like? Another like a really big one, like, do people speak highly of them? Uh, if they are if they talk really badly about a lot of people and they don't have a lot of like people that would um, vouch for their character, then it could be a signal that there are character issues under the surface that you may not know until you start dating them, which you don't want to put yourself through. So I would say community, how are they talked about? What do they say? Don't date somebody for what they could be. Let people
Say
say it again.
believe what people say about themselves and believe what their actions say about themselves.
Yeah.
Um,
Somebody gave me an analogy because I want to backpedal a little bit on what I said earlier. Like, you don't want to be hypercritical of somebody's salvation, of like evaluating like if they're a Christian or not. That's just like not something you need to be caught up in, especially if you're trying to date them. But somebody gave me this analogy that was like, imagine somebody standing on a chair and somebody standing on the ground. Would it be easier to pull them up with you if you're standing on the chair, or for them to pull you down? And so, like, if somebody is really struggling with their walk, or just maybe not, like, the gospel isn't evident in their lives at this point in time, like, it will be easier for you to compromise um, yourself than it will be for you to like make them better, because you cannot do that as their significant other.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's good. Um, when you are dating somebody, what do spiritual disciplines with your significant other look like? Is there any wisdom to what you should and shouldn't be doing? Like, should you be praying, reading your Bible with them, or is that a no? Is there something in between?
Yeah. I the prevailing big idea with this is you don't want to act like you don't want to act like you're married before you're married. Because there's things that even I would say married people, there's some caution with this as well. Um, I'll use the analogy of my job in ministry. So I I preach about every week, and part of preaching is sermon prep, and I am studying the Bible and um, engaging with Scripture to communicate it on a Thursday night. But it's very, very, very unhealthy if my sermon prep is that it just becomes my walk with Christ. If I don't have a walk with Jesus outside of my job, then what happens is my walk with Jesus, my spiritual health, becomes dependent on the health of my job. And that is very, very, very unhealthy, because my job, there's going to be ups and downs. It's based on my performance. Uh, it's based on a lot of things that are out of my control and are going to fail. I'm going to fail because I'm a sinner. People are going to fail because they're sinners. Our world is broken, so things are going to things are going to fail. And it's the same thing with dating and like doing spiritual things together while you're dating and while you're married. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you become spiritually dependent on another person. And so if I if I need Caroline's my wife, if I need Caroline in order to be with Jesus, then I've put myself in a really, really, really dangerous situation, because if and when Caroline ever lets me down, if we ever get frustrated with each other, if we are not on good terms, suddenly my connection to Jesus that was never designed to like be there in the first place is now broken. And one of the best things about being a Christian that sets us apart from any other religion in the world is that we get to have a direct personal relationship with our Savior and our Creator. And that is so unique and so special. And what happens so often in dating and marriage relationships is we give that up. We place this like mediator of a sinful person in between, where we are now reliant on them to make sure to communicate and be with Jesus. And so I don't want to say like don't ever pray together, don't ever read the Bible together. I don't want to say that, because I think like right now, me and Caroline and our kids, we do like a little scripture reading thing every night before we go to bed around Christmas time, and
So cute.
it's really great. We love it, and I think it's really beneficial for our family. But if that's my quiet time and if that's my walk with Jesus, then that becomes not helpful and really unhealthy. So I would just like, I wouldn't say don't do anything, like don't do any of these specific things. Um, but I would say be very, very, very careful about how you approach uh, doing spiritual disciplines with your significant other.
Yeah. So on the other side of that, maybe somebody's like, okay, I don't feel like my spiritual walk is tied to my significant other. Like I have a regular quiet time and time with the Lord. Like I think I would also just be really honest with yourself and like, okay, if I pray with my significant other, is it fostering like a kind of intimacy that is
Yeah.
unhelpful? Like, if you are not getting married yet and you are moving full speed ahead towards like joining your lives together, I think ultimately like praying together, like honestly, be really honest with yourself. Like, Gary and I did that together one time and we were like, nah, can't do that again. It's just like, it's, talking with the Father is just like a deeply personal and intimate
Mm-hmm.
um, thing that we have the opportunity to do as Christians. And so, um, like Caleb said it a million times, and we'll probably say it again. Like, one thing that is not sinful for someone could be sinful for someone else. And so,
Yeah.
if you sit down to do quiet time with your significant other, you're opening the Word, you're praying together, and you're like, man, I want this guy to be my husband, but it's not time yet. And it's like, it can be really like unhelpful and just kind of lead, sometimes lead to like a slippery slope of just,
Mm-hmm.
okay, then what's the next compromise? Um, Again, like not a hard and fast, like don't do this, but just I think it takes a lot of self evaluation to be able to do it well.
Yeah. And what you could be doing with uh, a significant other is something you could always be doing with a close friend who is not a significant other as well. So I would say like a great way to guard against what Catherine was just saying is to like, if you really want to pray consistently with your significant other and you feel really strongly about that, that's great. Commit to also do it with somebody who is not your significant other, who is the same gender as you, um, who is in your
Or
community.
even like, would you do those things if somebody else was there too?
Yeah.
Like, if you invited a friend to join you guys in your quiet time, like, would it still look the same?
Mm-hmm.
I think is important. And like, yeah, you want to have confidence that the person you're dating talks to God, and like, not in terms of like you're not evaluating their prayers, but
Mm-hmm.
like, is this something that they engage in? And like, you want to be able to assess that
Yeah.
as you're pursuing marriage for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
That's good. Um, Okay, speaking to our people who have been in long-term relationships, is there a time limit that is not great? Basically, how long should you date before getting married?
Mm-hmm. Um, how long have you guys been dating, Catherine?
Um, like 2.5 years in March, so a little over 2 years. And honestly, like Garrett would say the same. My fiance would say the same. Of like, we have enjoyed our time together, but we
I hope
wish,
so. You're getting married.
yeah, well, we are. But like to some degree, like we wish we had started dating later because we knew after about a year of dating that like, okay, I'm pretty sure like we're gonna get married, but now we have to wait.
Yeah.
And so like I'm not saying get married after a year, like a year is the ideal. Like it's different. It can be different. Um, but yeah, I say 2 years with a caveat of like it hasn't been ideal, but like
Hmm.
we don't wish for like less time with each other. We just wish we'd been more intentional like from the get go, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say there's like a hard and fast
Yeah.
thing either here. Um, just a couple things to think about. You don't want to rush into something.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are some great marriages out there that have been on either end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
There are people that dated for 2 months and then got married, and their marriages are great.
Yeah.
And there's people who dated for 15 years and their marriages are great. Um, I would I would caution in terms of general wisdom. Uh, you probably want to date for longer than a month um, before you commit your life to somebody because you it's a big decision. You
Yeah.
want to you're choosing who you are going to covenant yourself, promise yourself with. Um, as Christians, we believe in lifelong marriage, and if you are going to make a lifelong commitment, you want to really have time to evaluate if that is a good commitment for you to make. And so you want to make sure you leave yourself enough time to do that. But also remember, like, there's not really much you're gonna that you're gonna learn new about somebody after 4 years than that you wouldn't know by a year and a half in,
Yeah.
generally. Um, and sometimes life, like major life changes happen, and especially if you've been dating since high school, and you've probably seen if you're a junior or senior in college now, and you were dating your significant other since high school, you've probably seen them change in some really really significant ways, positively or negatively. Um, and so there's that reality, but uh, I would say probably in the 1 to 2.5, 3 year range is probably the most common, and I would say the shorter the better, just for the sake of like the longer you date somebody, the more you're going to trend towards wanting to treat them like they're your spouse
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
way that you don't need to. That could be sexually, that could be emotionally, that could be spiritually. It can look a lot of different ways, but I would say shorter, relatively shorter, is better than significantly longer.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. You said something during the I can't tell if it was I think it was the dating panel or the late night that was like, are you putting yourself in a situation to struggle with purity in a way that God didn't design for
Mm-hmm.
you? And so I think just keeping in mind when you're thinking about like how long should we date, like the longer you date, the harder it will be to like I guess like see the finish line of like why is
Yeah.
it good to save emotional intimacy, physical intimacy for marriage?
Mm-hmm.
Like it just will be harder. And sometimes there are things that are like outside of your control, and so yeah, just like being really intentional and inviting other people into that, and not just like bearing the burden of that, the two of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. While also using that time to evaluate, to get to know their friends, what their friends say about them, to see them in different life curveballs, I guess. And yeah, if dating really is like our evaluation period for marriage, then don't don't be a long evaluator.
Mm-hmm.
Just,
Don't
yeah,
take too long.
yeah. I don't know. Yeah, okay. You touched on the like what are the like playing marriage, so to speak, quote unquote. What are the signs of playing marriage? Give us some specifics during dating, even engagement, because you're
Yeah.
about to get married. How do you avoid that?
Uh, yeah. I'm gonna caveat this with most of these, not all of these. Some of these are wisdom things that are just like I've never seen an exception to this rule. Uh, but most of the things I would say are it could be wise for somebody and not for somebody else. Like Catherine mentioned earlier, there's no uh, everything in this side is sinful, everything on this side is not, and there's no in between. Like something could be sinful for one person and not for another. But just and so like the heart is what's important. And so if you are doing something like uh like there were times when me and Caroline were dating where we would like spend all day together. We would be like at her house in college or whatever, and we'd be like watching a movie, and then we'd make food. It like, and then it starts to like you start to imagine it's like oh like it's almost like we're married right now, and like that. Yeah. As soon as you start to like get in those thoughts, it can just lead you down a path that is really unhelpful. I would say that is like, I would say sleepovers are uh, really, I have never seen a positive reason to do a sleepover. I've heard some justifications for it that I think are at best misguided, at worst, I don't know, lies. And yeah, I think like if you are thinking about sleeping over with your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, um, I would just ask lots and lots of questions as to why you would be doing that. This is like separating totally from uh, like sexual intimacy. Even if you take sexual intimacy totally off the table and you were just talking about sleeping in a bed or sleeping in a room together where it's just you guys, uh, I would say that's just like really, really, really unwise um, because you're removing yourself from accountability, you're removing yourself from visibility, and that is like one of the most uniquely special things that married people do is they sleep in a bed together, and you go to sleep and they're the last person you see, and you wake up and they're the first person you see, and that is starting to do that before you get married uh, just creates an expectation um, and sets you up for a lot of disappointment and hurt if that relationship goes south or that relationship ends. Because if you start consistently sleeping over, then and you are starting and ending your day with the same person, like your day starts to revolve around a person, and then it becomes really painful and that much more hurtful to remove that from your life, and it can lead you to not get out of a relationship that you should, um and that's not even talking about all of the sexual temptation that comes out of that. Like I don't care if I don't care if you think that you can withstand that or not be tempted by that ever. Uh, I'll believe you, I guess, but I like I I'll believe you, but I I would be willing to bet that your partner is not in the same boat. And so like it is not caring for your significant other to put them in a position where they're laying in bed next to you um, in a way that is very, very intimate to begin with.
I think some more tangible signs of like playing marriage. It's kind of similar to what you were saying. Like do you have a routine that revolves around one another?
Yeah.
Like, even
Yeah.
if it's okay, we're not having sleepovers, but in the morning, like, we have breakfast together and then we
Yeah.
like go to school together and then like he does the dishes and I do this thing. Like,
Yeah.
those are smaller ways and I'll like own it. Like, it's really like an engagement for sure. Like, just knowing that like in a few months, like, we will live together. Like,
Yeah.
it's really hard to like uphold that, but I think in a similar way, not necessarily to the extent of like having sleepovers, like those don't at all help you wait, um, or like exude discipline in any
Hmm.
kind of way. I think, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about physical boundaries in a minute. I think, but that we're not like gonna give you like a hard and fast like this is what you do, this is what you don't do,
Yeah.
because we are all inherently sinners and we'll figure out a way to get right up to what we're allowed to
Totally.
do.
Yeah.
Right.
And so if sex outside of marriage is the hard no, then like, oh well, we can have sleepovers and we can make out and we can keep crossing it, but we're not as bad as the worst.
Yeah.
And like, I do think there are more rules than just don't have sex,
Yeah.
but they're different. Like, what's sinful for one person is not sinful for another. But like, yeah, I don't know if that's.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, taking a little bit of a serious turn, how do you deal with the fallout of an ungodly relationship? Like, say you were dating some guy that wasn't a Christian or girl, um, and then you guys break up, but there was like a lot of emotional damage as a result.
Yeah. It really depends on the nature of the relationship. I'll talk blanket about like a couple possibilities. If um, like the most common type of unhealthy relationship is a relationship that was sexually active, and when that happens and it ends, you've like the Bible teaches that marriage makes a man and a woman one flesh, and there is an aspect of that that is sexual. And um, when you when you start that outside of marriage, you are like bonding yourself with someone in a way that is designed to just happen in marriage. And so, and that's because it's creating a bond that is not meant to be broken. And so, when you have been sexually involved with someone that you're not committed to, and that commitment breaks, then it creates scars and pain. And when you walk out of that post breakup, uh, that can be the basis of a lot of the feelings and the hurt that you feel. Um, but oftentimes it's like there's that side of it. Deeper than that, a lot of hurt and pain that I've seen post breakup is due to just like simple idolatry of your uh, significant other that you were dating. And that is like so easy to do for, I mean, it looks different for everybody. It could be you are idolizing uh, the sexual gratification that comes from being in a relationship with them. It could be you're idolizing the security and the comfort and the companionship that comes with being with them. It could be you're idolizing their friendship. That could be like one of your only friends, and you are isolated outside of them, and you're idolizing that friendship that you have with them. It could be a lot of different things, but uh, that is all of those categories would be like fallout of your sin and fallout of your significant other sin that is like affecting you post breakup. But I don't want to pretend that there's plenty of instances that there's not plenty of instances where like there could be fallout and pain and uh, hurt from a relationship that is like totally not your fault either.
Yeah.
And um, I mean, there's so many sad stories of people in relationships that were uh, abused emotionally, physically, sexually within their relationships that now they're trying to figure out, okay, like there's hurt and there's pain, there's scars that exist in my life that were put on me with like that was out of my control, and am I the victim here? Is it my fault? And I want to say that like it's not your fault, the things that were done to you. Um, but I would say healing from that will look significantly different than healing from from your own sin in that relationship. And what's the reality is most of the time those things blend together, and uh, just because you were active in creating some unhealth in a relationship does not mean that it is your fault if there was abuse that you were a victim of as a part of that relationship. Um, yeah. And so I would say, like, um, in any situation, bring community in, uh, bring people into your life now. That's such a big reason why we encourage people to date in community, because it's much, much harder for unhealth and abuse to happen if you're in community. Most of the time, unhealth and abuse happens when you're isolated. And so we really encourage people not to be isolated when they date. Um, but if you are past that, if you're coming out of a relationship that was really unhealthy, uh, don't be alone. It can be the most tempting thing to believe that no one can relate to you, no one will understand you, people will not believe you, people will blame you. Um, don't be alone. Get with community. That's going to be the fastest way to healing. And then there's lots and lots of other options um, for you outside of that. But I would say that's by far the first step is getting community.
I would also say, like, with your most trusted community, that you're like, I am confident these people like know, like, love Jesus and are like have my best interest at heart. Confess more than you think you should.
Sure. Yeah.
If it like it sounds disgusting, and I know you don't want to do it, but like make there be somebody who knows everything. You will experience so much freedom from getting it out of your mouth. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
seen so many times girls with like and guys, not I mean I haven't seen guys, but like with so many like just years of things that are just so personal and hidden that like are weighing on you, and like you can experience freedom, and it's not weird to share those with your community. Like it's highly encouraged.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, so different topic altogether, but if you are thinking about marrying somebody and said somebody is like has confessed the sin that they are really struggling with that is going to affect your relationship or your future marriage, and you're like, well, I don't want you to carry that into our relationship or into our marriage, should you reconsider marrying them, slash what are the implications of your relationship moving forward after knowing said information?
Yeah. This is a really big question. That it's really easy to get it's really easy to start to think about this and then get scared of the consequences if you're in a relationship. Um, because I think most of us, if we're honest with ourselves, would say that we have not thought about this question enough. Um, because there are definitely things that are really common, and um, even if we would say that they're sin, like that are really common, that we still we don't take seriously enough when we think about marriage. So the easiest example, the most common example is just like personal sexual sin that exists individually. Obviously, like together in a relationship is a different category, but pornography, masturbation, those things. Like if those things, if your significant other has confessed those to you, which I don't think is a bad thing. It's I think at some point in your dating relationship before you get engaged, if that is something that's true about your life, or if it's something that's true about your significant other's life, you should make that known, or you should desire to know that about the other person, or have them know it about you. Because if unresolved sexual sin that is not on a clearly upward trajectory is present in your life, it is really, really hard to say that marriage is probably the next best step for you. Because you should, if you're dating someone that has a pornography problem and they've confessed that to you, they don't like it, they want to stop, but for whatever reason, they are struggling to stop and things aren't really getting noticeably better. Um, they're telling you something about themselves, and it's hard, but it's true, and it's that they are at some level incapable of like controlling their purity, uh, and confining a sexual relationship to marriage. And uh, sexual sin doesn't stop when you get married, because it's a symptom of sexual selfishness, not sexual desire. Sexual desire is not bad. Sexual selfishness is. Um, and so I would I would say that that sin specifically is a instance where you should ask some serious questions, and uh, really, really consider if marriage is the right next step for you guys, if one of you is really struggling uh, with personal sexual sin. Personally, I would not advise someone who is uh, actively struggling with pornography or masturbation to step into a dating relationship in the first place. But the reality is, so many people find themselves in dating relationships with people, or themselves walking through those things. So I would say, like, man, pump the brakes on marriage, because the best thing that you can do for your spouse is to not bring that into marriage with you, because it is going to cause so much more pain and suffering that is not fair to you or your significant other, if that's what you bring into the relationship. So I talked a lot about sexual sin. Um, I don't know.
So I'm just thinking in like a hypothetical scenario in which like you're a girl and your boyfriend has come to you and confessed pornography. Like I think it's really important to evaluate like are they confessing that to you to like kind of take the weight off of themselves, or because they truly hate their sin, and are seeking like radical change in their lives? Are you the only person who knows about this, or is this like known among their community? Are there people coming alongside them in fighting this like in a radical way? Um, or is this something that they're more passive in? Because I think that's really, really important to evaluate in somebody that you're considering joining your life to for the rest of your life. Yeah, because I would say if it's the former, being the more passive approach, like that can be really dangerous, I think, and just not something you want to bring into a covenant.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, last but definitely not least, because I think it got submitted at least 10 times. How do we set boundaries? What kinds of boundaries should we set in dating? How do we effectively set boundaries?
Yeah, so this is where clarity becomes so important, because uh, you need to like define what the relationship is. DTR. DTR, that's what that means for anyone who doesn't know. You need to define what the relationship is in order to set boundaries. And so if you're living in this weird limbo world where you're not actually talking to each other, and you're just like you're texting or you're Snapchatting or whatever, and there's no commitment, you're not calling yourself anything, there's no label, you need to put you need to be something in order to set boundaries on that thing.
Yeah.
So I think when you go on a date, like it can be an early conversation. It doesn't need to be on your first date. Your first conversation is uh, you're setting off all these boundaries for when you're dating. Like that's not the thing. But it's like, I think when you go on a date with somebody, it depends on who it is, but you probably want to communicate uh, like, hey, I want to be home at this time. Hey, I don't want to be in XYZ place by ourselves. Hey, I don't want this, and this. Like you want to be forward with those expectations because you can't expect someone to hold to a boundary that you never communicate or they never communicate to you.
That's good. Yeah.
Obviously, there's things that are sinful for sure, but and it should be clear that you both care about each other's holiness, but you shouldn't be bitter towards someone that doesn't adhere to boundaries that you never communicate. So, but when communicating boundaries, communicate them really early. That would be one principle: communicate boundaries early. First date, or like in that conversation where you decide to go official or whatever. Like you want to have boundary conversations early. You also want to be like pretty specific with your boundaries without being confusing. So a bad boundary is oh, we're just gonna like flee sexual immorality. Like that's great. That you should do that.
It's more of a vibe.
But it's like that's hard to really like concretely do and measure exactly. But also you don't want to like, it's not helpful if you say, okay, when we're at this person's house, we hang out till this time and we have this many people around, but if we're at this place, we do this and this and this. And you don't want to create so many rules that they become really hard to follow. So I would advise like some blanket rules and guidelines that serve as your boundaries. But the biggest thing I would say, the most important thing with boundaries is to bring other people into your boundaries.
Yeah. Yes.
And not just like, oh, hold me accountable to this, but it's like, no, like actually help us enforce this.
Yeah.
Something that we do, what me and Caroline do when we do marriage counseling with engaged couples, especially that are really struggling to walk in purity or things like that. And this sounds pretty radical, but it's what we do. And we don't force this on them; they choose it.
Willing participants.
They're willing participants. But we have the locations of the people that we are counseling.
Love it.
And we commit to, like, if they communicate, hey, we don't ever want to be at our apartments alone together, or we don't want to be at our apartments after this time of night or whatever. Part of our commitment to them is, okay, great, like we're going to hold you to that, and we are going to consistently check if, like, we're going to check on y'all's locations and commit to text you in that moment. Like there was a time a couple weeks ago where I saw that they were together at her apartment or at his apartment, and I texted him and he was like, oh, we're just like sitting and watching a movie with our roommates. It's like, great. It doesn't have to be like a
just a
proclaim shame on you
Yeah.
every single time, but it's like way better to allow that check-in to happen and it be nothing than no check-in to ever happen, and suddenly you're 6 months into this deep spiral of sin that you never wanted to get down, but you just never had a way to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say be early with boundaries, be specific, but not like confusing, and then communicate your boundaries and have other people hold you to them.
Yeah. I would also add to that list, like, be willing to adjust them, but not like push them back, but push them forward. Be willing to, okay, we made this boundary. It's not necessarily like as strict as we need. And so be willing to set the bar even further away. Not further away. What's the right direction? Closer?
Be farther away from sin, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stricter.
Stricter boundary. Yeah.
And so I also just want to give some like practical examples. If this is like your first like Christian relationship and you have no idea like what even boundaries could look like, I think it's important to evaluate sleepovers, making out, time alone, how much time you spend together, who you hang out with. Like these are all just important things that something that was really helpful for Garrett and I when we both first started dating. Was like making a specific boundary list, like me putting on there what I know leads me to temptation and setting the bar, where I guess less comfortable than I would want it. Because I know myself and Garrett knows himself and what would lead him to temptation. Putting that on a list and giving it to our closest community as well. Like these are like what we are committing to. Check in with me on these like specific things. I think something I've been thinking about a lot is like it's a boring dating relationship is like what you want. It sounds like lame to be like in terms of like physical intimacy. Like it sounds lame and you probably don't like it, but like a boring dating relationship like saves so much sweetness and intentionality for a marriage relationship, and like it just really is worth it. Um, yeah.
Yeah. The only other thing I'll say um, to that is uh, rules don't make you holy, and boundaries. You can have the best boundaries ever. It's not going to keep you from sinning. And you can't just rely on the boundary to keep yourself from from sinning. So if you're consistently breaking your boundaries, it's not a boundary problem, it's a heart problem. And you need to be in a place where you're gonna uh, like want to and be able to follow your boundaries, because boundaries are useless if you're not going to follow them.
Right. All right. I'm calling out all the single people listening to this podcast. Hey, we're not dating anybody, so we don't have to worry about boundaries, right? Wrong. Hey, I just think that there is wisdom in that process of self-evaluation that Catherine was talking about, of like, what are the things that are going to lead me to temptation, and learning those things about yourself before you're put in a situation where where it's like not fun. Yeah, where it's a problem. Is just super, super, super important. And I think going back to what I was saying earlier about really investing in your friendships, like if you start dating somebody and you don't have really deep friendships, if you don't have that one person that knows everything about you, then it's like, who will you share those boundaries that you and your significant other have come up with? But then also, just like protecting your own heart, before you're dating somebody. I think practically, hey, if you are somebody that really is struggling, like is really wanting to be in a relationship and you're not, then maybe reading your Colleen Hoover and your romantical fiction books is just not helpful. And just because everybody else on Goodreads has rated it 5 stars does not mean that it is 5 stars for your holiness.
So good.
Hey, I feel convicted about, like, I feel strongly about these things.
TV and
Yes,
like the
that's
other media we consume as well.
my next thing. If you're really desiring a relationship and you're single, your cutesy little Hallmark movies aren't going to be helpful either. And I love a Hallmark movie, but there are like there have been seasons where I'm like, I cannot watch this or else I'm just going to feel lonely and sad. And so I think self-awareness is key. And like we said in the beginning, clarity is kindness when you are in a dating relationship. So yeah. Any last words of wisdom? We're the three wise men right now. Merry Christmas.
I think dating is, I don't want this to be us knocking dating. Like, dating is great. We love that people are dating, especially dating in our ministry. Like, we church, Salt Company is a great place to meet your future spouse. We want to champion that. We want to encourage that. But we want to encourage you guys that and care for you guys in a way that shows you how to do that well. I want to shepherd you in that. So I hope this has been helpful.
Hey, we love you guys too. And we're not just voices behind a microphone. So if there are things that, like, I'm talking to the girls in the room, if there are questions that you have, me and Catherine are around.
My phone number is.
Please, please ask us. Yeah, don't be a stranger.
Thanks, guys. We will catch you whenever we do another one of these.
Bye.